Thanks very much everyone for coming. For those of you who aren't aware, my name's Olivia Dean and I'm chairing tonight's event. Before we get started, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we are gathered on here today. They are the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nations, and I'd just like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. And I'm sure everyone's grateful to be on this land, especially given the view that we get to enjoy tonight. Unfortunately, actually the door's still open. I thought they were going to shut the balcony, but I'd encourage everyone to have a sneak out there if they can, because it's a beautiful view. So just to give you a rundown of what's going to happen tonight and a bit of housekeeping. Obviously we're here for World Bipolar Day, so thank you everyone, and if you don't have your pin already, there are pins at the door, you can grab one on your way in or out. It's really a celebration of bipolar disorder tonight. I think for too long there's been adverse stigma, and I think everyone's a little tired about talking about it. But I think it's testament to the fact that we've come a long way. And I think everyone here is touched by bipolar disorder in some way or another, or you wouldn't be here. Or if you're not, you've come to find out, which I think is a wonderful thing. So, the housekeeping that I have to go through on my magic piece of paper. The bathrooms are near the lifts, if you didn't notice them already. The main exit is obviously this one, but please keep your eye out for other exits should we need them. And if there is an evacuation, we'll get hopefully a person over the speaker that will tell us where to go. We are filming tonight's event from the audience forward, so if you are sitting from the audience back, you won't be filmed. However, if you're just uncomfortable about the whole process or the photographs or anything that's going on tonight, please let one of the organisers know and we'll ensure that your face doesn't show up on anything. Generally speaking, this is the first time we filmed it, which is great, so that'll be hopefully available after the event. And the photos that we take are used for social media, so for Twitter, still can't say it, you can tell how old I am, Twitter and Facebook and things like that. As I mentioned, if you don't feel comfortable with that, just let someone know and we'll make sure that your image isn't shown anywhere. We do generally take your photos so we know who you are down the track, but please be assured that photo will be destroyed. We just need to remember who you were on the night. The structure of tonight's event is going to be pretty straightforward. We have a wonderful panel of speakers here with a varying perspective on bipolar disorder, and I'll introduce them one by one as they come up. At the end of that, you'll be given the opportunity to have your questions answered. So the way that we like to do that is everyone should have found a question sheet on their seats and a pen. Please feel free to take our beautiful impact pens if you scored one. We are running low on them. They're a bit of an exclusive item at the moment. If you want to ask more than one question, that's fine. We've got spare sheets, or you can pinch one off a seat that's not filled. So there's plenty of opportunity. If you fill out a sheet and you want your question picked up from someone, the rovers will come around. And if I could just have some of the organisers stick their arms up for me. There's a whole bunch of them floating around, and they will come and collect your questions. Then what we do is we collate them all, and we find that to be a really good way to make sure that the most amount of questions get asked, and that similar questions get asked as one. So it maximises the number of questions we can get through. Unfortunately, what tends to happen is we get to the end of the night and there's more questions than we have time to answer. So if you find that your question hasn't been answered, we apologise in advance, and we will try to get through them all. But it'll just mean you have to come back next year and do it all again. Hopefully by the end of tonight you will have had the majority of your questions answered. Anything else in the housekeeping I need to go through? No, it seems I've covered all of my duties as a good MC. Wonderful. So without further delay, I will introduce Neil Cole, who's going to give our opening address for tonight. So Neil, could I ask you to come up here, please? Thank you.
Hi everybody. I haven't been to Geelong for some time to speak. Then I don't get asked to speak so much these days. And I was looking for Little Mallop Street, and I asked a woman, "Can you tell me where Little Mallop Street is?" And she said, "You're in it." So I've come a long way not knowing. I used to know where I was and where I was going, at least with geography, if not with my mental illness. I did want to say before I start, I do have bipolar mood disorder myself, and I was diagnosed with that in 1993, and I've been on lithium since then, and that's been very effective, although I've had lots of problems, but I'll talk about that in a minute. What I wanted to talk about tonight is, apart from appreciating being invited to speak and take the opportunity to come down here and talk to people and hopefully enlighten people as to what I think the direction ought to be in the dealing with bipolar and mood disorder in the future. Having said that, I noticed Rotary Health are here, which is fantastic, and I remember in the late 1990s and 2000s, I went all over Australia talking for the Rotary Fund on mental health, and I think I worked out I must have spoken to over 10,000 people, and that was because we were trying to raise the profile of it, and I think it was very successful. They raised a lot of money and done wonderful work for mental health. But look, what I wanted to talk to you about tonight was, I think that for consumers such as me, people who take medication, who have bipolar and are required to remain on that medication, of having a look at what are the major issues. Now, with respect to consumer movement, since I started talking in 1995, it's just boomed with people. You know, I was driving down here tonight and there was 2 shows, 1 or 3, including one on young people taking ecstasy too much, and another on young people and mental health, and then there was a more general one of the latest study on mental health. So by the time it was finished, I was totally confused as to what on earth to do. And I think that's something that we should all take into account and reflect upon. When we come to the case of the other problem is the consumer movement once upon a time had a task of telling people that even though you've got a mental illness, it's not a death sentence. You can still live a productive life. It may not be easy, but you can. The fact that you've got a mental illness shouldn't be a deterrent to getting on with life. Now, that's a very glib, easy statement, but at that stage, that was the message we needed to get out to the community, because everybody believed if you had a mental illness, the game was basically over. And prior to the advent of medications, it basically was. They put you into an asylum. Well, that doesn't need to happen these days, and people like myself, I was a member of Parliament when I went public about my illness, and it was a big sign to say, well, you know, people who are in positions can have these illnesses. It doesn't matter. It's not the end of the world. It is an illness like any other with symptoms attached to it. Now, having said that, the consumer movement, of course, became very, very negative, and often people were just, they had an axe to grind, and I wanted to tell everybody. I recently went to it was about 3 years ago, to a thing in Perth, and a gentleman at the Consumer Day said, "Oh, I had a couple of episodes of psychosis, I didn't take any medication and I'm okay now." And I said to him, "Well, lucky you, you know, I'm on medication, I've got no choice, I have to be on it." And, "Oh, you can go off it, but then, you know, it wouldn't be very good." And he was going along to tell this story, and I thought, well, it's a bit more complicated than simply saying, and that quite often happens, that people have a psychosis and never get in the rest of their life. We know that. That's not the point. So there is a problem, and I think, but the other thing that has to be said, and I'm generalising, but I think I'm about right, is with people, with our highs, when you go through a high, we can treat the highs quite effectively now. Not only is there lithium, but there's a whole range of other, a panoply of different medications with varying side effects and so on. So we have to be careful about their use. But basically we have treatments for the highs. They're much better. It's much better than it was, say, 25 years ago when I first went on medication for my bipolar. Recently, about 2 years ago, my psychiatrist decided that I should go off lithium. It was a stupid decision by her, which I was a bit, I adore her, but it wasn't a really, and decided the latest and greatest was better for me. And because as you get older, there are questions, maybe your kidneys, maybe this, maybe that. And it appealed to me because I thought I might take off weight. See, with respect to stigma, I've suffered much more stigma over being overweight during my life than I ever have through my mental illness. Which is an interesting point because a lot of the medications make you put on weight anyway. So I went into a shocking high with all the usual suspects there, libido out of control, spending patterns, no sleep, going to bed at 12 o'clock, wanting to wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning to do wonderful things. It subsided, it didn't subside until I changed back to lithium and went on to a mood stabiliser again. What I feel as a consumer, as a person, can say that we can treat the highs. Not perfect, as Michael will be able to talk about that later on, but there is a sense that we can do that. What our big problem is the lows. Now, why I say that is, year 2002, I was on a particular drug that's now been taken off. It was absolutely useless for depression, and I was severely depressed, and I made all the classic mistakes of a person who's in melancholy. I had a house, I sold it. I couldn't cope with the mortgage anymore, or thought I couldn't. Did a whole range of things, pushing life away, getting rid of relationships, so on, all because you're so severely depressed and melancholic, you want to push them out. This is me, but I think it's quite common in a lot of people. Resign from committees, change your job, do whatever you can to take away the pain of the depression. I finally saw a certain person who told me that the drug I was on, who was a professor, said the drug I was on was no good. And so we changed with my psychiatrist. I changed to one that I'm now on, which I won't mention, which has been very effective, coupled with a mood stabiliser. And since 2002, I've not had any depression. Now, this is a big thing because from 2002 to when I was 16, I had numerous severe, including at university, including when I was a Member of Parliament, very severe bouts of depression. Now, melancholic depression. So suddenly, I haven't had it. I've had my lows. I took up running. I've been doing that for 15 years. I've been very effective for the lows, but not to get rid of melancholic depression. Now, when you are severely depressed, even now, after all of Beyond Blues and everything else, nobody really has a clue what depression is what I've observed. That we have, in that severe state of depression, low self-esteem, which defines depression against grief and any other thing, low or no self-esteem, indifference to what's going on, which is why people, I'm talking fast not because I'm manic, I'm talking fast because I've only got 10 minutes. But I thought I should I realise I'm going a bit too fast. But plus I'd be so much faster if I was. But indifference, that's why accidents occur. That's why you get so many bloody parking fines, because you don't care anymore. Well, I do anyway. Suicidality and that overwhelming thing called what is the point of it all, right? Depression is not an homogeneous illness, it is heterogeneous. People who suffer with bipolar depression, the depression suffer a different type of melancholia, a very severe, unpleasant one, almost at times intractable. Now, why I raise this is I think that we have forgotten that that is our biggest problem in mental health in general, because it doesn't only apply to people with bipolar, it applies to people with schizophrenia. The bulk of the suicides are people who are suffering very, very severe melancholia. And we have nowhere, and we don't have the treatments. I am one of the lucky ones. And each time, and everything I do now, I'm so much happier I feel confident in what I do because I don't have depression. I get scared about it, which I'm sure all those who've been into it would understand that. You don't want to go back because it's so unpleasant to experience. But equally, it's like life has been given to you so you can get on and do lots of things. I won't say great things because then I'd be accused of being grandiose and going high. But what's important is that we have taken depression and said 1 in 5 people will suffer mental illness, 1 in 5 people suffer depression, but we forgot to define it adequately what it means. That it is low self-esteem, indifference and so on. And there are many people who don't respond to medication, to ECT and so on. I don't want to use the word treatment resistant because I did use that term a couple of weeks ago, and people say, oh, treatment resistance if you had two antidepressants and they don't work. Well, that's bullshit. But treatment resistant is somebody who even goes to the extent of having ECT and can't respond, or it doesn't last, it can't be maintained. What I want to see is that a statement really that our greatest form of stigma is that we don't have the treatments for people, and we shouldn't run away from that fact. And in particular with depression, because I use depression because it's ubiquitous and there are so many people who have very severe, I would say it'd be at least 20% of people who have depression, even if it is comorbid with schizophrenia or with bipolar or with OCD, whatever it is, sorry. There's this thing that we call treatment-resistant depression or severe melancholia, which we don't have treatments for. Now, in our attempt, and we'll talk about Headspace and young people and Beyond Blue, what else have we got? Oh, there's a whole array of things, and you know, they're all got their relevance. But the most relevant it is all is that we must look for treatments for depression, for severe, intractable depression. We don't have a specialist facility that would deal with that level of melancholia and the sort of things we do. How long have I got? Another minute or? Yeah, another minute or two. For instance, and this is just one example, and I'll finish on this, is a woman, a doctor in New South Wales. I won't say where she went, but we had to go to the Mental Health Review Board to help her, and we wanted to do deep brain stimulation. A little bit controversial, but I don't know why. It's sort of, they do it for people with Parkinson's. And one of the reasons was there was nothing else. Absolutely nothing had worked. And she had it, and it worked. And I think that's not everybody's going to need deep brain stimulation. Not everybody will have that. It's just an example of an extreme end of trying to resolve the problem of melancholia. Like, unless we can isolate it and have a place, like I had a friend of mine who I idolised when I was at university, who drove his car into a truck to kill himself. He'd been out in hospital, left hospital, melancholically depressed, and he did what he did. Right? He was a lawyer, he was a senior partner, and he owned the firm. Everything said, he had, inverted commas, a good reason for living, and he took his own life. Because we didn't have the next stage of treatment for him. I've dealt with 12 people who've taken their own life, just for the nature of the job, because I'm a consumer consultant. And in each case, it was due to comorbid, yes, 3 of them were schizophrenia, but there was a strong element of melancholia within it. And unless we have somewhere else for people to go with a specialist treatment, it's not the only reason they'll take their own life, but it's a large part of it. And unfortunately, 90% of the people who take their own life have got a serious mental illness at the time they do it. Now, the people who are running the suicide prevention strategies and so on don't necessarily adhere to that view. I don't know why, because the evidence is there. But my message is that we, as a bipolar, we have there's no need to feel ashamed of having it, because It's just an illness like any other, and you've got symptoms, and they may appear a bit strange at times, but they are what they are. But the most important, in my view, the most important is to look towards stabilising people, and the only way we're going to do that is to put more and more effort into melancholia. Is that right?
Thank you very much. That was a very interesting and I'm sure thought-provoking opening, and I think it really set the scene for some of the questions that I'm sure will come out tonight. A couple of things I forgot to mention is we have some educational materials if you want some more info up the back, and that includes numbers for people that might want to get help if they haven't already and they're seeking some sort of treatment service, so that's just something else that's available. But I think I'd like to thank Neil again. As I said, I think that was very thought-provoking, and it'll be interesting to see how the rest of the speakers follow up. So next up, I'd like to introduce Jason, I think. Just make sure I've got it right on my run sheet. I have a terrible memory, if you haven't noticed. Yep. This is Jason Trethoran, and he's from Headspace, and he's going to tell us all about his experience as a clinician. Thank you.
Thanks, Olivia. Look, I'm not a clinician, but I've been working in the health system for around about 22, 23 years, and it's interesting when I say that I've been working in a system. Most of that time has been working in the mental health system as someone who has been able to, or tried to at the very least, listen to people to help make the system work better for those who need the services. And I wanted to start off this evening in my talk by firstly thanking Neil for sharing lived experience. I want to acknowledge all people in the room who have a lived experience with bipolar disorder, and also acknowledge families and friends and carers of those as well. And I guess that will be the theme of my discussion, or short few words tonight. So when I was looking a little bit more in terms of talking about on this topic tonight, words that came through were around rapid changes in mood between depression and mania, or a mixture of both. Moodiness was a common term that was mentioned. Inflated self-esteem mixed up with grandiosity. Impulsiveness. More talkative or having pressured speech, involvement in risky activities or potential for serious negative consequences, increase in impulsivity again, changes in energy levels and appetite. And I thought, well, you know, that they are the words that others have written based on the experience of those who have had bipolar disorder. And it led me to go a little bit further about, well, just how prevalent is bipolar disorder in our community. And in the case of, I should premise the fact that yes, I am from Headspace, and our age range that we work with young people is between the ages of 12 to 25. People may know of Headspace operating out of here in Geelong. It has been, it was one of the first services that opened up here in Australia, and there are now 109 Headspace centres across the country. And the 110th is in a very different place called Katherine in the Northern Territory, which will open up next month. And when I say 110 services, combined the Headspace funding nationally is the equivalent of about 1/10 of one large hospital in Melbourne. I'd just like to put that into context, okay? In young Australians aged 16 to 24 years of age, it's estimated that 3.2% of males and 3.6% of females have had bipolar disorder in their lifetime. It's actually the 9th leading contributor to the burden of disease and injury in Australia for females aged 15 to 24, and the 10th leading contributor for males in the same age bracket. I spoke with some Headspace clinicians around this, and that what they say, and also with other doctors as well, that Headspace GPs and other clinicians in the early years engage and see over time, even before there is a diagnostic clarity, they see those signs and symptoms. It's obviously something that occurs earlier in life, but just waiting to be put together into a package to say this looks like the trajectory that a person, or a journey a person is on. And seeing over time and monitoring and linking the appropriate supports in the interim is all part of the job. One of the areas that the clinicians have found in the primary care system, and Headspace is very much that early intervention service. It's meant to be a safe and secure place for young people to come and talk about what's on their mind, those who are having a tough time. It ranges really from those with symptoms of anxiety, depression, anger, and also young people too who are actually lost in respect to goals in life, family relationship issues, and the list will go on, but predominantly it will be around anxiety and depression, and also alcohol and other drug related issues. The experience and impact of mental ill health during this early stage in life can derail key developmental milestones and significantly increase the risk of poor health, social and education and employment outcomes. I have to say, whilst Headspace is heavily known as a mental health service, for me personally, what I'm driven by is actually helping people who are experiencing a tough time, who may have a diagnosis, who may not. But the idea is to work with them, respect their experience, because it's theirs and theirs only, to ensure that we can match the right supports at the earliest possible time, and be with them until such time that they say, I've got enough information, or I've got the right therapy, or indeed I may need to have, like Neil said, having long-term medication to maintain positive mental health and wellbeing more often than not. So in fact, the aspiration is not so much about mental health and treating a disease or treating a sign and symptom today and fixing it, a bit like you might go and get yourself patched up in the emergency department if you've had a cricket injury, or sprained your ankle or something like that. It's actually more about ensuring or working with people so that they can live the most functional life. So it is often spoken about in the context of mental health, and certainly with bipolar disorder, as much in the social and economic perspectives. That is, that if we can actually work with people, with the right services and treatment early in life, they too can go and complete school, they too can go on to university or get a job, and actually when they're there, they can stay in it. Because so many of our young people who present to Headspace are actually disengaged from work and study as well. So as a service provider organisation and that safe entry point for young people, we must always take the approach to understand and not to judge, respect the lived experience and the important role significant others play, such as mentioned before, families and friends. But I want to get to a couple of frustrations that I have that have been represented by users of the mental health system, and I don't think it'll be a foreign concept, and in fact Neil's already pitched on a little bit, is that we have a system that is really in development, the mental health system in Australia. Headspace itself is only 12 years old, and it's the oldest youth mental health system, as you call it, in the world, and it's only 12 years old. When I say system, I'm talking of national scale. It's about 14.6% of the burden of disease, and we get about 7% of the funding in terms of the health portfolio. It's a large $170 billion thing, don't get me wrong. But whilst there's been discrimination against, or stigma, I'll say more carefully, stigma against mental health and those seeking help, there's also been, for mental health related reasons, but there's also been a stigma in government policy since day one. Hopefully that is starting to change. That is, sort of not being able to recognise that we need to do more and respect those with lived experience, hear the stories and get on and do something. We wouldn't run it in the same way you would for cancer services or indeed cardiovascular disease. So what we have at the moment, we've got a couple of planks out of a few that have been built. One is, in Australia, fairly what you'd call widespread coverage of general practice or primary care services, and Headspace is an example of that, primary care services, where typically we're involved in working with young people, in our case, for those with mild to moderate mental health issues. And by that I mean is it tends to be mostly about four and a half sessions on average for a young person, who will have it in a Headspace context, that 62% will have significant reductions in their psychological distress levels or improved functional outcomes like staying at school or getting a job and staying in employment at any given time through their journey with us. We also have an acute mental health system, which we know very well. That is that it's bed-based services and various community supports to support people in the community who are living with significant mental health issues. But there's not a lot in between. There's been great attempts in Geelong, for instance, and other parts of the country that I've seen to establish systems that don't exist. But the frustration that we hear all too often in mental health is for those who almost reach a level in the primary care system whereby the expertise is not there. Or indeed, you're not sick enough, you're not acute enough, your acuity is not high enough, you're not complex enough, you don't rate high enough to warrant a service in a specialist mental health service. So what we have at the moment, in the context of bipolar disorder and others, is a need to address the missing middle of Australia's mental health system. And by that I mean, in the same way that we have for other parts of the health system, we need to do the same for mental health. At the moment, we have way too many young people, way too many people of all ages for that matter, heading to emergency departments in crisis, in high levels of distress, suicide attempts, self-harm, lost, and the emergency department is the worst place you could be when you're feeling like that. So what we owe it, and I'm fortunate enough, almost on a daily basis, is to be working with the likes of Professor Pat McGorry, whom Michael knows very well, former Australian of the Year, and actually the world champion in advocating for a better youth mental health system, particularly for those more significant mental health issues like bipolar disorder, but also Pat's predominant involvement has been around the area of psychosis. And that model itself has been played out in Australia in 14 different headspace centres. And one thing I'll finish on, what I really like about that model is the role of peer support. Having people walking side by side the journey of those who are currently experiencing and are scared and afraid, to have someone to be working side by side who have had the same experience and the similar journey, for them to walk side by side is incredibly powerful. They may not be the most expensive employees you'd have, but they'll be arguably the most important ones. Once again, I'd like to thank you all for coming here this evening and also for allowing me to be a part of this panel, and I look forward to the discussion as it unfolds throughout the evening. Thank you.
At the moment, if you've got questions that you have already written down, stick your hand up, and some of our rovers, they'll just come and collect them. Stick your hand up high and they'll come. So I just wanted to take a bit of a pause while people are writing down and thinking about questions, just to reflect on our two speakers, our opening address and our first speaker. I think it's been really interesting, and I hate to say it, thought-provoking. But I actually don't know what they're going to say when I put these events together, so it's always heartening to see that we're going to have a really exciting night of thought-provoking speeches. I'll sit down now and think of another adjective, but before I do, please let me introduce Matthew Dale, who's come to speak to us, and I'll let him introduce himself also. So thank you very much.
I just wanted to say thanks to everyone for coming out tonight and to the panel as well. So I was asked tonight to come and speak regards to what would you want to know about bipolar disorder from my perspective, my view. So I've looked at that in two ways, like before I was diagnosed, and I think during the journey where I'm at now, is what would I like to know still now, because I think there's still a lot of questions, even though it was 22 years ago since I was first diagnosed. So when I was diagnosed, I was 26, just shy of 27, had returned as a mature age student at TAFE, and things were going along swimmingly at the time. And before I knew it, out of the blue, I became unwell, I became hypomanic, and I didn't know what hypomania was, I didn't know what bipolar was. Back then, I was lucky to know having gone through secondary school, what was depression or anxiety, because organisations such as Beyond Blue had not been around. They've been around about 16 years or so, and they've done an excellent job of making people aware of what depression and anxiety is in the community, but I think there's still a lack of knowledge or understanding around the low prevalence illnesses such as bipolar or schizophrenia or personality disorders. There's still a lot of stigma and misunderstanding around what those mental illnesses are. And that people do not have to fear those illnesses. If there was a greater understanding around these illnesses, people would accept that, and I think there's more acceptance of that in the community. It would mean that a greater proportion of people would then seek early treatment, and I was quite blessed in my experience that for having to go see the school counsellor, I won't go into great depth about that, but I had to go see the school counsellor who knew me from returning as a mature age student, not because I'd seen her about other issues or problems. She picked up on the fact that I wasn't my usual self and linked me in with the local CAT team or crisis assessment team, and was treated at home in the community. So I avoided a hospitalisation, which I think anyone that's been in hospital would appreciate is not the best of places sometimes to be for your mental health. So I was just quite blessed that I had a good public psychiatrist that thought it was in my best interest not to go into hospital, because myself, I've been working in the mental health sector for the last 17 years and have come across a lot of stories that haven't been necessarily good of people that have had poor experiences, and that's not just public, also in the private mental health sector. But I think having looked back then, if I wish I had more understanding of the illness. It's not to say that I would have picked up on some of the early warning signs, and also my friend and the other man that I was sharing the accommodation with, if they, in the broader community, I think in general, had an understanding of bipolar disorder, like hypomania or those sort of things, then they might have picked up on some of the things. I think they might have picked up on some things, that I was going out 2 hours in the morning and not getting much sleep and doing a few other things, that sort of thing, but I don't think they truly knew what was going on. And like I said, I had no idea that I was becoming unwell, so it was obvious looking back in hindsight, and hindsight's a good thing. I must have had a depressive episode the year before, when I first come back from travelling in Europe, and then I got into this travel and tourism course, and that's when things did improve for the better. But like I said, then the hypomanic episode happened, and I was diagnosed with bipolar 2, and hopefully tonight, for those people that don't have an understanding of bipolar, there are different forms of bipolar, so Michael might talk more to that, or the panel bipolar 1, or the more milder form called cyclothymia. Just to reiterate what Neil said, I know myself looking back now that through getting support, and early support in particular, and accepting the illness, that I see it. For example, I was diagnosed with having high blood pressure when I was 40, and I could either accept to take medication for that or not, so I'd prefer to be here for the long run, so I take blood pressure medication for that. I see that with a mental illness, that it's important as well to stay well, to whether it's taking medication, but it's also the other things that you do in life, whether that's getting a good night's sleep, eating well, exercise, everything that we should all be doing anyway. Not always good at the exercise thing, but also, like I was saying, people can and do live a full, meaningful life, and especially when, I think, for people when they're first diagnosed, they might not have much hope, and I think for them to talk, as Jason was saying, to work with peers, to provide that hope to someone else, that people can and do recover. because the thing is with bipolar, and again, I think what Neil was saying, with lithium in particular, that was what I was on originally, and it was a godsend. And at a conference they had in Sydney just over a week ago, the International Bipolar Conference, lithium is still, correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, but lithium is still seen as the gold standard for treatment as a mood disorder medication, but it doesn't always work for everyone, so people have to potentially try what works for them. Because I have been on that medication for a while, and then I had side effects and had to go on to another mood stabiliser. I think also, yeah, just over the years, I think people come to learn their own strategies, because everyone's experience of a mental illness is quite unique and different. There might be some similarities, but some things, what works for me and the strategies and things that I put in place might not work for the next person. So it's a matter of being aware of your own early warning signs and triggers, and they're very important. And sometimes, I know for most of something as human beings, your own pride might sometimes get in its way, so I think the loved ones around you can be very important to sort of just let you know that maybe you might be a bit, hypomanic, or if you're not travelling too well, whatever, that's really important as well. But it's not easy for anyone that's a carer here, excuse me, anyone that's a carer here tonight, it's not easy for carers as well in their role. Thanks.
Again, another excellent presentation by Matthew, so thank you very much. And I think it's important to recap at the moment that we're travelling on a journey, it seems. I think all of the speakers have taken us a little bit of the ways to their experience with bipolar disorder, and I think overall what I'm getting from tonight at least is a sense that there's been a long way to travel. There's been a long road travelled, and there's still a ways to go. But overall, it's a very, very positive experience that we're hearing tonight, and I really think that we should all sort of harness that and take that with us when we go into the last speaker. So our last speaker is going to round out the session, and then we'll have our final round of Q&A collection. So if you've got some questions, just hang on to them, and we'll kick off the Q&A session. So thanks, Michael Burke.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. I want to thank our previous speakers, particularly Neil, for really setting the scene for the message that I want to put across, and Matthew as well, for beautifully expressing the need and inspiring us as researchers for doing what we're doing. I want to start off by saying that this is a partnership. So we're partnering with the community. Our team is devoted to trying to improve the lives of people in the community. And if you think about it, this is a community of people all unified together in the quest for the same goal. In this light, I kind of want to thank the people who are supporting us. So Bipolar Life, Campbell Page, Geelong Clinic, and Australian Rotary Health. We value your support in our quest to improve the lives of people who struggle from this very difficult illness. Now, research is a very important part of the quest. Research is where useful treatments come from, and I've devoted my life to working to develop better treatments for people who have illnesses like bipolar disorder. For me, treatment is the single most important thing in mental health. It's what people seek, it's what changes people's lives, and it has other effects beyond that. Effective treatment is anti-suicidal, and effective treatments, in my view, are by far the best anti-stigma campaign we have. Treatment is what got rid of the stigma of leprosy. It was antibiotics. It wasn't anti-stigma campaigns. Antibiotics got rid of the stigma of leprosy. And understanding that you can have a disease like bipolar disorder and still be an incredibly successful playwright, with multiple plays, as Neil has, that is the essence of what destigmatization is. You can live a full, rich, normal life with or with, despite having an illness like bipolar disorder. So I want to just tell you a little bit about some of the work we're doing at Impact in terms of trying to come up with better treatments. Neil hit the nail on the head saying that depression is the major unmet need. It is. And that's where we're spending most of our energy and activities within the Impact Research Centre. So I'll just tell you a little bit about a few of the studies that we're doing, just to give you a flavour. I also want to say that we greatly value our partnership with you as consumers, because without consumers being on our studies, we wouldn't be able to do them. So we are working to improve your health, but we really value for your partnership on the studies that we do. So in no particular order, Olivia Dean is doing a really interesting study on a novel herbal fruit compound called mangosteen. We've got some really interesting clues that this might have useful antidepressant properties, both at a biochemical level, and also we've got some preclinical studies, and we're busy doing a clinical trial to see if this extract from the mangosteen fruit actually does treat bipolar depression. We're very interested as well in psychotherapies, and Leslie is very actively working on two projects. The one is called Bipolar Caregivers, which is a internet support resource. It's a website, bipolarcaregivers.org, to give caregivers the support, information and guidance they need in order to help their loved ones with bipolar disorder. Also, we've developed a face-to-face therapy called the MAPS program, and we've been able to transfer this onto the web as mood swings. So it's, and we're busy trying to improve mood swings, and we're also involved in upgrading and improving the MAPS program to make it a hybrid face-to-face and internet-based approach. So that's one of the projects that we're doing. We've also been very fortunate to just receive funding to study a new blood pressure medicine for bipolar disorder. So we've got some very interesting evidence that a particular group of blood pressure medicines might be useful antidepressants in their own right. Sounds crazy, but we think that we have really good reasons for believing that this might be a useful antidepressant, and we're just successful in getting Medical Research Future Fund support to start a study. If you like science fiction, one of the most interesting studies that we're doing is being led by Ken Walder and Chiara Bortolassi. We want to understand why some people respond to lithium and some don't, and we really don't know why that is. So what Ken and Chiara are doing is they're taking blood from people who either respond beautifully to lithium or don't respond at all, taking white cells, turning those white cells into stem cells, turning those stem cells into brain cells, and growing miniature clusters of brain cells, and then we can tickle these brain cells and see what genes they express, what proteins they make, so we can look at the biochemical profile comparing lithium responders and lithium non-responders. This will allow us not only to understand a very important part of the biology of the illness, but the ultimate aim is to try and find a target for which we can discover new treatments for. So an awful lot is happening in Geelong. We think that we are the busiest research centre in Australia for the development of novel therapies. We're hopeful. Certainly my life's goal is to find one thing that really works. I don't know that we'll manage that, but it's certainly something to aspire to. And again, I want to thank the community, you, for supporting us in our quest to try and improve the lives for the global community of people who struggle with this, at times, very, very difficult disorder. Thank you.
Lovely. Excuse me for a minute. I've learnt to cough away from the mic. I had an unfortunate incident of coughing straight down the mic once. It was terrible. No one wants to hear that. Thank you to all of the speakers. I think everyone can agree that we've had a very interesting and thought-provoking, I couldn't help myself, set of panel speakers. But in all seriousness, I think that this has provided a good scene to really open it up to the floor for questions. Just before we go to the Q&A session, I'd just like to give a quick another hand to our speakers because they did do an exceptional job. So while they're all here because they're passionate, they're all here because they're passionate. This is a voluntary gig. We don't pay anyone, so I just thought I'd mention that. These people are here voluntarily, not because I made them. Could I have some questions, please? Thank you. Okay, so here we go. The first question is for all presenters. Please have your mics at the ready. Is it possible to live with bipolar disorder without taking traditional medications? And are there strategies to do so? So I'll kick off with whoever can get their mic turned on first. Hang on.
It's possible, not advisable, and I wouldn't do it without consultation with a psychiatrist. But I've been there, done that, and prior to being diagnosed, there wasn't anything I didn't try, including Chinese herbal medicine and other things, and they didn't do any good. So I think you've got to be very careful.
Mm-hmm.
I'd agree with Neil. I was medication-free for 10 years and had several stressful things happen during that time, but was just aware of my own early warning signs and triggers with the help of my partner and other family. But again, I think if you look at the research and evidence, most people, it's not advisable. But when I did go off medication, again, it was under the guidance of my GP, and I was ever very slow that I came off the lithium at the time. But I think after having a relapse of depression during the last 20 years, I don't think I'll be going off it again. I don't want to go back to that place. But I think it's also the other things that you do in your life that are important. It's not just around medication.
Do you want to give us an example of some of the positive things you can do? Apart from exercise, which you've obviously covered off on and may not be your favourite thing to do.
Yeah, I don't do a lot of it, but I think some people are doing things around mindfulness, but also, I think too, some of the things like that they're working on at Impact and other places, there will be other potential through some apps and things could be very useful for some people in the future. They're just going to be improved over time as well. But I think for staying well, for a lot of people, when they're doing a safety plan or a wellness plan, when they are well, but having a very good support network is vital as well, whether that's partners, friends, family, doctors, psychiatrists. Mm-hmm. Having a good support network is vital in staying well, as well as the things you do yourself.
Great, thanks. Do the other members want to say anything on top of that? Next question. Excellent, thanks very much. Okay, this is for Michael. What's your perspective of the Australian genetics of bipolar study, and would you recommend contributing DNA?
All right, this is genetics. Look, genetics is an important part of the picture, but it's only one part of the picture. We know that this is a disorder that does tend to run in families. There have been a lot of studies looking at the genetics of bipolar disorder, and for that matter, other psychiatric disorders like schizophrenia and depression. And the genetics, as I understand it, is very complicated. There are a large number of genes involved. All of these genes have very small individual effects. There's no one gene for the disorder. And even if you have the genes doesn't mean you're going to have the disorder. So for example, if you have an identical twin with bipolar disorder, you've got about a 40% chance of not being ill at all, despite having the same genes as somebody who's unwell. So genetics is an important part of the picture, but it's absolutely not the whole picture. So in terms of the study, look, I would support involvement in any study. So for a genetic study, all you do is you take a cheek swab or something like that, swab, put it in the mail, send it off. It's not much cost to an individual, I would hope. But in aggregate, if enough people participate in studies like this, we get a better and more refined view of what the genetics of the disorder might be. Of course, the hope is one day, if we know enough about the genetics, this will contribute to us developing better treatments. So ultimately, contributing to studies like this is contributing to perhaps your future, but also other people's futures who might have the illness down the line. So for the same reason that we as a research team are passionate to better understanding this illness and developing better treatments, we rely on the community to partner with us in this quest to understand what causes this illness and to develop better treatments.
Great, thanks. Nothing to add? Wonderful. Okay, the next question is for Matthew and Jason. Can you provide some information on how to tell my family, in particular my kids, about my bipolar disorder?
So I have just one child. She's 15 now, but I thought she's pretty switched on, but decided when, I can't remember, but I think it was at least a couple of years ago, waited till she got to a certain age and took her along to a psychiatrist appointment with me and had the psychiatrist explain to her in a sort of more simplistic way of what the illness was.
Great.
What was involved, so I think that was very helpful at the time. Because since then she hasn't asked any questions or anything, but for all I know she may have, being the person she is, she may have researched things online, but I don't know. She's never talked about it, so... But I think, you know, I mean, sometimes she might hear discussion around the house with my partner, but yeah, it's not something else that's come up, but like, there's a lot of good resources out there too. Trying to think of them. COPMI, Children of Parents with a Mental Illness.
Great.
Through, so COMPI. If you Google COPMI, they have some good information for, not only for bipolar, but for parents to have that conversation with their children about having a mental illness. So there's some really good resources that are downloadable and DVDs, I think, that they're happy to send out as well. But
Great.
there's quite a few resources in the community.
That's really helpful.
I think it's a real positive thing to engage others, particularly those who you love, and share your experience. And more often than not, you'll be incredibly surprised by how much they welcome hearing it from you. Michael's mentioned that word partnership a couple of times tonight, community partnerships, and I'd encourage you to think of it in terms of a partnership. So perhaps before going to a loved one to talk about bipolar disorder and that you have that, talk to someone who you trust the most in the clinical team. So it may be the psychiatrist, the GP or the nurse or someone that you enjoy having that conversation with, and seek what they think. You won't be the first person who's asked that question, and you won't be the first person who'll come back and tell them, geez, I'm glad I did that. There is help out there, as Matthew said, around some resources, but you're effectively going to be role modelling something that you'd expect of others, and that is, it's actually okay. It's actually okay to talk about you and your experience. Don't badge it as a label. Don't go the label path. Just talk about you. And that's what it will turn into, the most amazing conversation, as it does with so many Australians today, who are talking about things that perhaps in generations gone by we were just too ashamed to talk about. I'd encourage you to be the role model, because if indeed they too experience mental health difficulties down the track, gee, you'd want them to talk up, wouldn't you? You'd want them to say something to someone that they love, and that's what you're doing. You're going to be helping. Think of it, you'll be helping them rather than yourself.
Yeah, we can do that. That's okay. I think that was a brilliant answer too. I need some more questions, please. I just read them as they come. Thank you. No, I do want to take another second to appreciate those two answers. I think they were really thoughtful, and I think when we're talking about stigma, as you suggest, if we're going to change things, that's the way to start. And I think that's brilliant. I hope you guys got as much out of that as I did, and we're not just here for me, sorry. Okay, so this question is for Michael and Matthew. Oh, this is going to be an interesting answer. Can you please describe mixed states? So, can you define and describe mixed states?
I think with my experience of bipolar, I've been quite lucky that I don't experience mixed states, and Michael will have to correct me, but my understanding and knowledge of what I've read and mixed states is where for someone, and it can be very difficult to deal with it, because some mixed states, some people, it depends too, you talk about rapid cycling, where some people can be not only depressed but also manic or hypomanic in the same day. They might be depressed for a couple of hours and then an hour later they're feeling great or hypomanic. So mixed states is where a person could be either in the same day, or it could be where for a few days they're depressed and then come out of that and then go into a hypomanic or manic state. That's my understanding of mixed states, but Michael can correct me on that.
That's completely correct. So technically a mixed state, at first stage it kind of, at first glance a mixed state makes no sense. It kind of says that you're hot and cold at the same time, you're up and down at the same time. But many people have symptoms of being high and symptoms of being low at the same time. So they can be depressed, miserable, suicidal, but they're racy, they're agitated, they're driven, they can't sleep, they can't sit down, they can't sit still, their thoughts are going a million miles an hour. So it's not an unusual experience, it's a very unpleasant experience. People who have bipolar disorder, who have mixed states, often say this is the most unpleasant phase of the illness. There's some suggestion that mixed states may be more likely to be caused by antidepressants. There's a link between antidepressants in people with bipolar disorder and mixed states. In terms of the natural cycle of the illness, there's a patch where symptoms tend to be mixed. So often highs tend to start happy and euphoric, and they tend to end a little bit mixed and dysphoric. So as you're about to, when the highs end, and often when people switch into a low, that transition phase is often mixed. So you've still got some features of being high, but you're starting to become miserable and irritable and edgy and on edge, and you're still agitated, and your mood is starting to slip and go down. So some people, they only have mixed states. Some people, it's a transition phenomenon. But it's a very unpleasant and high-risk place to be. Neil? No.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, so this question is initially for Matt and then for everyone else. Please make suggestions on how to manage relationships with workmates and or friends who are living with bipolar disorder. So how do you manage relationships from the other perspective if your friend or your loved one has bipolar disorder?
Yeah, I think, so if a friend or partner has a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, because my current work is actually working as a family and carer support worker, so I'm sitting on the other side of the fence too, supporting people that have a loved one, so trying to be understanding of that. But I think for that person to, it helps them if they can have an understanding of the illness by doing some reading or speaking to their doctor, or being involved, going along to a psychiatrist appointment or psychologist appointment. I think it only empowers the partner or person to have that understanding and to be more empathetic to what's going on for them. But at the same time, it's not easy for anyone that's a carer, whether it's for a physical illness or a mental illness. But I think, like any relationship, communication's the key too, about talking about what the early warning signs or triggers are for that person. And again, like I said, that's unique. So I think that's because it can be very frustrating at times. Like, as you know, with some people, if they're hypomanic, they might be wanting to spend money or put the house on, come home and the house is on the market and whatever. That can cause a lot of problems. And Neil was saying that people can have an increased libido, which unfortunately has ended a lot of relationships. But if people can if they have a greater understanding of the illness, it's no excuse for people behaving as that. Mental illness should not be excuse of poor behaviour, but if the person is unwell at the time, there's things that people do that if they were well and thinking rationally they wouldn't normally do. So it's having that greater understanding.
Yeah, great. Oh, I think that's really useful. Excuse me. I think the main thing I got from your message is it's good to talk to people and have good relationships, open relationships.
I think I just talk from an employer perspective, and I get that employers will be different. But if someone comes to me and says, look, you know, they've got the job and got it on merit and all those sorts of things, if they disclosed that they had bipolar disorder, to me that would be pretty awesome, because it's that partnership that starts straight away. That when someone actually, we're all happy to say, oh, look, you know, you might see me hobbling around because, you know, I got a bit of a dicky knee from when I played cricket and all that sort of stuff. Oh, well, that's why he hobbles. But I think this comes back to the stigma, and I keep bringing it back. I know we've got treatment and we've got stigma discussion going on tonight and conversations, and part of the role we've got, all of us, is to help educate others to understand us. And I as I said personally, if I had someone who disclosed to me whatever the condition will be, it builds my understanding, perhaps what they may be experiencing. It will allow me as an employer to be more understanding, rather than saying, oh, why have they ducked off? Not that I would do that anyway, but don't underestimate the influence and the power that you have to convey this to other people. And you see the likes of Neil and Matthew, you know, really, you know, you're saying it's thought-provoking. I'm learning a stack just listening to their experiences. I'm better for it tonight as a result of that. And your employers and your colleagues can be as well.
Well done. Yeah, we can have another smattering for that one too. Don't hold back, people. You know, we're here to celebrate.
So can I add?
Yep, if you can turn your mic on.
Because I didn't talk about there from an employer's point of view. It depends. It's like Jason's saying. I think having for a long time I didn't disclose working in the mental health field, and then I did finally. But it's interesting. You think working in the mental health field that people would be less stigmatising, but sometimes you can actually find the opposite, that people can be just, if not more stigmatising, sometimes they're not as understanding. But I think, again, like Jason said, it is good. People are, I think, becoming more accepting, and it's healthy to have that conversation.
Yeah.
And people, because they're employed on their merits in the first place, for their skills, their knowledge, ability, and mental illness doesn't discriminate. There's some very capable people out there, and if they keep well, look after themselves, statistically people with a disability have less sick days than people that don't have a disability. And there's evidence to back that up.
Absolutely. Excellent. Any other comments before I move on? Great. Okay. Oh, Jason, you're the man of the evening. How does bipolar present in teenagers? I think that's probably one Michael could answer as well.
Yeah, I think I might throw to Michael because how does bipolar present in teenagers? I'm only going to recite some of your stuff that you've done, so you go and do it.
Well, bipolar disorder begins in teenagers.
That's
so the
right.
average age of onset is 17. It is a disorder of teenage onset. In terms of what does it look? It looks just like adult bipolar disorder. So highs, lows. What makes it difficult in teenagers is that the first thing that you see is often not what gives you the diagnosis. So often the first thing that you see before the illness is clearly manifest is non-specific stuff like sleep disorders, anxiety. Often the first thing that people experience is panic attacks or insomnia. Often then you have depressive episodes, which in the absence of a high, you can't tell that this is bipolar. It might just be depression. It could just be diagnosed as a reaction to environmental stress. And often a couple of years later, you get the first episode of highs, and you need a high to diagnose bipolar disorder. But even then, it's not always easy to make the diagnosis because maybe you were using drugs, you know how much overexcitement and insomnia makes a high. And often it takes more than one episode before it becomes really clear, especially if it's mild hypomania. If it's full-blown mania, Swanson's centigrade, fine, then it becomes clear. But often it's not that clear. So one of the things that makes it difficult is that the illness evolves over time. What also makes it a little bit complicated in adolescence is that the boundaries between adolescent rebellion and substance abuse and an emerging disorder like bipolar disorder is not always as clear as it might appear to be. So it often takes a bit of time before the diagnosis is made, and that period is often very difficult for an adolescent because they're struggling, they're in turmoil, it's not quite clear. And sometimes treatments that you might give if you don't have the diagnosis are quite different from the treatments you might give if you do. For example, antidepressants. If you've got a young depressed adolescent, it's a reasonable thing to start an antidepressant on its own. In bipolar disorder, that's usually not a wise thing to do. So it's a difficult time clinically.
I think also it's adolescence, it's difficult enough, and your first experience and your second experience of engaging the health system about what you're going through may not be that good. And it may be actually a deterrent to go back again and engage. All I'd say is people are building a lot of resilience by finding the right person that's going to listen to them and help understand what's going on. And then they'll be going, well, who do I need to engage to help me make a determinant about what's going on as well? So it takes a lot of conversation, but when you get there and when you go through the process with the right people and the right organisational culture, as I said, it's going to listen to understand rather than just listen to judge and put you on a path that they think is the right idea without actually understanding your social circumstances, without understanding your family, without understanding other variables. It's actually really complex. So I know in the case of services where we run in Adelaide around the youth early psychosis program, there's a part of that model is around called case detection. And what that is actually being active in the community, working with frontline responders, if you like emergency departments, trying to identify people up front who are displaying behaviours or traits of psychosis. The reason is because you want to bring them in. You want to actually have assertiveness in a kind way of conversations to help build the bridge so that the conversations can flow and the understanding can start to happen. My first point is the main one is that it takes multiple conversations for someone to understand you. Don't give up.
Anything else to add? thanks very much. Oh,
Quickly, because, correct me, Michael, that I think most people are like classic ages, but maybe between early 20s and mid-20s have been diagnosed, or?
Yeah, there's often a significant lag. So the first symptoms are about 17. Diagnosis is often quite some years after that.
Because I know from us, like if someone asked about the teenage years, it's not until, I mean, I was 26, but looking back, there's probably little things you can sort of pick up on now that it wasn't obvious at the time. And with bipolar, like it's, you know, the most misdiagnosed of the mental illnesses can take 5 to 10 years to get a correct diagnosis, because often people will just present, as Michael was saying, with depression or anxiety to their GP or something, and they pick up on that. They don't pick up on some of the
other symptoms.
The other symptoms.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thanks. Excellent. All right, so this one's for all of the presenters. Do you feel that the NDIS model is currently working for people living with bipolar disorder?
I wouldn't have a bloody clue.
We like honest answers. Thanks very much, Neil.
There's, from what I read, there's 250,000 Australians now on NDIS, but there's 50,000 in Victoria alone. But there's still a lot of people waiting to get onto the NDIS. Now, having worked in the not-for-profit sector for many years, I think personally it's not all bad. It's going to take time, because it's like the biggest thing since Medicare came in. But there are examples of people that we work with that are a lot better off under the NDIS system, where they're getting a lot more support and help during the week. But then again, I think a lot of money was spent on the program at the start, where they were giving out a lot of money and packages, probably too much money to people. So now people that are applying for packages are finding either very difficult to even get a package money, or they're not getting very much at all. So they're not getting. So a lot of people are possibly falling through the cracks, but hopefully through the primary health networks, they are also supporting people, like for being able to see outside of the Medicare system for seeing a psychologist. There are people that can go for appointments and things through that, but it's a work in progress. There's a lot of unknowns about it.
No, I think that's really important to hear from the personal perspective too. Does anyone else have any comments?
Jason?
Yeah, look, I'd say at the moment probably not. But that's not to say it won't get there. The mental health inclusion in the NDIS was late in their thinking, and we're probably getting what we deserved in some respects by taking it on at that early stage. That said, it's gone too far for everyone to say, oh, we should not do it anymore. We should, but I think where Matthew's going to is that there's been some transitional funding, which means transitional funding means we didn't get it right, so we better top up something and someone so you can just get continuity of service, or there might be people now getting more services. But I think that's where organisations that are here tonight, so I might just, Bipolar Life, education support, I mean, they're the ones to talk to. They may not be the best ones to navigate for you, but there will be shared experiences, and I know the NDIS are wanting to get better at actually understanding the feedback loops about what's working, but in particular what's not working. I think we've got a long way to go, don't we? But there's there's hope there. Yeah.
I just wanted to add, because the government, like Jason's saying, the government's made a big commitment, and a lot of money's been set up and setting up NDIS offices and all the rest of it, because all the work I'd done in the past was what they call block funding. So they might say, here's $1 million, you must see X amount of people, direct face-to-face or whatever. I think that worked better. They should have left mental health alone, like Jason was saying. Physical health, yes, bring on the NDIS model. But I think a lot of people are missing out because that might, organisations now, instead of getting block funding, they'll just get little dribs and drabs of money from people that nominate once they get a package of money. So they're not necessarily getting the service that they were getting beforehand.
Yeah, so it's obviously a mixed bag then. Hopefully they can sort it out so that it is better in the future. This one hasn't been nominated, so we'll open it to the panel. Weight gain is a common side effect of treatment for bipolar. Is there any new information on how to manage this?
What was that?
Sorry, I'll repeat the question. Weight gain is a common side effect of the treatment of bipolar. Is there any new information on how to manage this?
Yeah, this is a common and vexed problem. Most of the best treatments we have weight gain as a side effect. Lithium does, valproate does. Many of the atypical antipsychotics have weight gain as a side effect. Not all treatments do. Lamotrigine probably doesn't. Some of the atypicals don't. But given that most people are on more than one medication, this is a challenge faced by many people. Weirdly, some people can take the same medication and gain no weight at all, and some people can take the same medication and gain huge amounts of weight. We don't know why. So it's very much an individual vulnerability. We know that when the illness begins, there isn't a particular problem with weight. It's only once the treatments begin and the illness progresses that people gain weight. This is a major problem for many reasons. It exposes you to risk of things like diabetes, heart disease, and all the kind of things that we know go together with weight gain. What can we do about it? Well, I think that there's 3 or 4 things that you can do. The first is, in an ideal world, you try and use medicines that cause less weight gain. That's always easier said than done. If you're an excellent lithium responder and other things don't work, well, you're on lithium, and you may have the weight gain that goes with lithium. One does have a choice with atypical antipsychotics, so Zyprexa might be a very effective medicine, but it causes a lot of weight gain. It's best not to use it. There are alternatives that cause less weight gain. But even that's easier said than done for many people. One needs to pay good attention to lifestyle. And it's very important that attention to lifestyle begins very early in the management of the illness. So we should be getting people with disorders like bipolar disorder, and for that matter schizophrenia, access to physical health programs, gym memberships. There's their services in Sydney that have physical activity as a routine part of their treatment. We know that this helps. It's not widely used. It's only done in specialist research active centres that are researching it. There are medications that you can take that might reduce your risk of weight gain. The one that's most widely used is metformin. So this is a treatment for diabetes, but it does help people to prevent weight gain associated with medications. Doesn't stop it, but it helps a bit. But it's a real problem, and I don't think that we have cracked the solution to this for many people.
Thank you.
Again, another reason why more research is needed.
As I said in my speech, I've received more discrimination against me in my lifetime for being overweight, even when I wasn't. I had a fat face, so therefore I was overweight. But the thing that concerns me at the medical level, firstly, there is a problem that people are put on, so in a high phase, I'm not saying Michael does this, but it is a problem that they're put on to, say, one of the drugs that puts on lots of weight, and because they're doing all right on it, they keep them on it, whereas they shouldn't. They should do, so maintenance therapy shouldn't be something that is for an acute phase. I won't mention the drugs because I don't want to poo-poo them at all. So there's a problem, and there's a big problem if you ever have the experience of going to somebody who's been put on a CTO and I haven't done it many times, you turn up and almost the first thing the person says, when can I go off? This is mostly schizophrenia, because I've put on so much weight. To which their response is, oh yes, but your psychosis is all right. And it's not really enough, and it's sort of like saying, oh well look, you're okay, you haven't got a psychosis, but you're 20 kilos, 30, 40 kilos, big, put on. So there's a shocking dilemma, I suppose, but also lack of concern by the psychiatrist of the weight gain. Now, that's a generalisation, but it is an observation that I've made. The other problem is that what people with mental illness, including myself, are asked to do is roughly equivalent to pretend that every day you're about to have a heart attack. You've got to eat this, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. There's all these things surrounding what you're supposed to do, either to keep weight off or to live a good life. And quite frankly, people who haven't got a mental illness battle with that problem. If you've got a mental illness, particularly in the depressive phase, it's extremely difficult. You know, the chocolate fetishes and the sugar hits and so on. And there's two things that I'll finish on. One was, I was working as a consumer consultant, just standing in for a mate of mine at the private hospital, the Melbourne Clinic. And at one stage I went to one of the professors there, and then I spoke to nurses and I said, do you realise that this place hasn't got a gym here? There is no place where people can go, ride a bike, do a few weights, whatever, right? And they said, oh, they can't do that because they might hurt themselves. And I said, look, I can understand that, but surely part of a treatment in this place, which is bloody expensive to be in, should be an outlet of, like they have walking groups, but they don't have a gymnasium where people can go and get the endorphins, get the concentration flowing and so on. So that's a major issue. The other thing is, I tried to get a thing going where we'd have once a year a walking thing, where, you know, like everybody, mental health, go for a walk. It wasn't just to say, oh, destigmatise, it was actually to get people walking so that we could get better. And it was coming from me because, as I said, I took up running, and, you know, it's very, very valuable to do exercise and also helps with weight. But there's not enough emphasis on it within our community. So, like, for example, with the NDIS, I'm not exactly sure, but I think they are allowing you to go to a gym and to pay for it. And I'm not sure, I would have thought those type of things are outside the range of normal, but so necessary for people. But look, one of the biggest problems I've seen, Michael, I'm sure will ratify this, people going off medication because of the weight. Like literally going into psychosis because the stigma attached to being overweight was still the expectation. Like women particularly are expected to be roughly, I'm in the old say, 1 stone below the average weight. You're expected to be twiggy. That is the expectation. That's what the Women's Weekly and everybody else pursue. They pursue a very strict, this is what you're supposed to look like. It is bloody impossible to live by it, and certainly with mental illness it's extremely difficult, and with medications, diabolical. So we have to train ourselves to think, people with mental illness, I mean, to think differently about weight and what it actually means. And that's, I don't say it's an impossible task, but it's a very difficult one. And I think as far as the medications go, we have a big education job with people with weight gain. That's a real problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd just like to have a chair's comment, just because I can. I have the microphone, no one's going to stop me. We have a student...
For a minute.
Oh, well, I invited that.
Okay.
We have a student working with us at the moment at Impact that's just completed a study that's shown that people who partake in higher levels of physical activity do well in this particular clinical trial. Now, it was a very small study, but after the results came out and we were sitting down talking about it, she said to me, so the bottom line is if we all just took care of ourselves better, then when we got a mental illness, we would be better prepared. And I think that's true. Yeah, and I think that just touches on your point, Neil, is that everyone should be taking better care of themselves.
But just to go, there are studies being done. One of them was done in Texas on people on a bike, and over an hour they could, with extensive, 40% of the people could remove their depression for an hour. But you have to ride pretty bloody fast to do it. So there's a downside to these things, but it's something about not being ashamed about your bodies, and in a society that's constantly telling you, you know, you're fat, you're bad, you're porky, you're this. It's very difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we could spend another hour in a Q&A session talking about body image and the issues with that and the media, and I'm not going to get on a rant. Let's move on. This question is for the entire panel. How do we reduce the likelihood of bipolar disorder in our children? Thank you. Okay.
I would like to answer this one as best I can.
Sure.
You can't, because I believe it's genetic, but you can mollify, improve, enhance their well-being by not putting them through adverse, stressful arrangements which are or were a product of my upbringing. That if you did something wrong, they belted you. We don't need any of that. We need love and attention and care. And if we do that, then we will, in my view, reduce the symptoms of the illness that they are most likely going to have, because it's genetic.
Sure.
So,
other panel members?
so love's probably the quotient, I would say. Love.
Love. I like that.
Yeah, I think sort of similar to Neil, but especially the first 5 years are crucial in anyone's life in regards to a lot of things. So, but having at least one positive role model in their lives. So, depending on how things and how they're brought up at home, if it's a loving, caring family. But I also think when they're older too, like we were talking about in that question earlier about maybe educating them around the illness, but like we know, like what Michael was saying, there's no, just because someone's carrying a gene, it doesn't mean necessarily that that's going to come out anyway. But if there is a positive environment, generally that's a protective factor for that person anyway.
Great.
I do completely agree with everything that's been said up till now. So a loving environment, I mean, we can't reduce exposure to all kinds of trauma and stress, but certainly trauma and stress is not good for kids. Smoking is a risk factor, so staying away from cigarettes helps. Drugs is a very high-speed highway to problems. So a kid who's at risk who uses drugs is going to be at much greater risk. So any kid who's got a family history probably should be very, very cautious about using any recreational drugs at all. Healthy diet, physical activity help. And what also helps is if there's a family history and an adolescent is showing signs of trouble, get them into care as quickly as possible, because early treatment can avert, and if you get onto this quickly, you can treat this quickly, you can avert the disrupting impact of an illness on life. You can avert the impact on the kid's educational trajectory. You can avert the adverse impact on their relationships and meeting their life goals. So even if illness does happen, just getting onto it quickly and getting treatment quickly. The message still has to be one of hope. This is something that can be treated. This can be managed. And people who have this illness, as we can see, can still live rich and rewarding lives, as complicated as it can be.
My only extension to all that would be is to, in advance, is to get to know your local health system, get to know the local social supports, get to know someone who has bipolar. Understand the support groups. So it may well feel like I've got plenty of other things to do in the event that it might happen, but remembering the multiple conversations you're going to need with lots of people, you can actually identify or understand from others about who did you go and see, what did you do when you sought help initially, or if you were a parent trying to help your teenager get help, where did you go? Those are the sorts of things you can do in advance.
Okay, I'm just going to cut you off. Thank you very much. We've officially run out of time, but we have so many more questions, and there's some really good ones. So I am going to ask one more. If you do have to run off at 7:30, please just run away. But I thought I'd finish on a practical question, and I really like the way it was written. Winter is coming. Please comment on how we can combat seasonal affective disorder. That's for the panel. Starting with you, Michael.
Seasonal affective disorder is a complicated beast. It's the idea that people tend to have particularly depressions at a particular time of the year, and it's normally winter and the transition into seasons. A lot of work's been done on this using light therapy. Interestingly, and so this is exposure to very bright light, usually in the morning and usually for a period of about 15 minutes. So they sell these light boxes. Because we're a pretty bright and sunny country, it's not really caught on here, but in Canada, light boxes are really big, and they use a lot of phototherapy. Interestingly enough, it seems to be helpful for non-seasonal depressions as well. So if you're just depressed, it's something that people are studying as a treatment for depression, bright light therapy. So apart from light, one treats seasonal affective disorder as you would treat depressions at any other time of the year, but the only specific therapy is the light.
Thank you.
I don't think it's only the question of seasonal affective disorder, which is a very, it's quite specific illness. I think if you're in the middle of winter it just seems to catch up on you, if that's the right word, and you can become a bit depressed. I must say, last year, and this is a very extreme way of getting around it, I went to Edinburgh for the festival, and I didn't have any problem that I knew I would have had in Melbourne. Now, I'm not just saying everybody get up and go. I must say the worst time for me is actually Christmas. I just have terrible depression. Not as bad as it used to be, but it's palpable. So I think, look, it sounds trite, but maybe I do think there's a need for people with bipolar and with unipolar to get away from it all, or at least acknowledge that it's there, and to somehow do things which enhance your life and so on, and to be aware that as it gets darker, and I find, not just me but others, it's the change in seasons which are a problem too. But I do think we need to acknowledge that it's there and it's prolonged, and it's a problem. I must say Edinburgh is not the best place to go to because it did resemble a Melbourne winter. All the time it was raining the entire time we were there, and when the sun came out, everybody had this sort of like a powwow, the sun's here. But it was certainly a change, and I've done it a couple of times, so it's certainly, there is something about a winter that affects your depression. So the best thing to do is to be aware of it, and someday, if you can go up to Queensland, if you can go somewhere or even just have a holiday, but that's not available to everybody.
Absolutely. Anything else from the panel? Excellent. All right, I am going to have to wrap it up as much as I would like to keep going. Can I ask our beautiful committee members to bring me some thank yous for the speakers? And could I ask everyone to thank our beautiful panel for such an awesome night? So we've got token thank yous for all of the speakers from a local chocolatieri. So that's a bit of yum, and we have Adam who's handing out our beautiful gifts. So that concludes our night. Just to say a few words, firstly, I'd like the organising committee to put their hands up again. These are a bunch of people doing this out of the goodness of their hearts, and they aren't very well recognised. So we will take a moment to thank them. So I just want to finish off by saying thank you to everyone for coming tonight. I hope you found it as interesting and thought-provoking as I did. I'll find another word for next year, rather. One thing I also wanted to say was that this is the third year I've been responsible for organising an event like this for World Bipolar Day, and every year the questions are different. And I think they're moving, I think they're shifting, and I think that comes with opening conversations and having a better understanding about bipolar disorder generally. And I hope that's being conveyed on this side of the podium too, because as I said, you know, it's all about me, and this event is really just to educate me. Just kidding. The last thing I'd like to do is thank, again, all of the people that came to support the event. So we've got a lot of people from different service providers and stakeholders that have brought education material. I'd encourage you all to pick something up if you haven't already. We also have badges for World Bipolar Day, so if you didn't pick one of them up on the way through the door, please make sure you grab one. It's March 30th every year, and we thought we'd make it a bit of an April Fool's this year, so hence... I'm a scientist, I don't have good jokes, I'm sorry. So thank you all, and can we just give a final round of applause to our panel?